Well, we got a Big Ten weekend that is assuredly going to have some excitement. We finally have reached the big game, the Ohio State-Oregon game. We're going to get into that a little bit later in this episode. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the Purdue Boilermakers. And to break it down with me here, we have my co-host, Sonny Verma. Sonny, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I thought when you said big game, you were talking Illinois and Purdue, since you had an Illinois and Purdue guy here this Saturday. But okay, I guess there's another game on. Okay,
is no big Illinois games going on. These are all small games. So the only big one y'all had was against us, and we're not going to talk about that one though. But and as you can see here with me in the middle, Dustin Schutte to break it all down with us. Dustin, do you want to tell the people where they can find you, what you got going on, and links to his stuff will be in the description. But yeah, if you want to go ahead and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so I cover primarily Purdue sports and the Big Ten for SI.com. SI.com/college/Purdue is where you can find all of my stuff. So it's a heavy emphasis on Purdue football and basketball, women's basketball. We throw some volleyball in there, and then just kind of a holistic picture of the Big Ten. I do a Big Ten daily every day, so lots of good stuff for just about every fan base.
Awesome. Yep. Sonny, go ahead.
All right, Dustin. Let's just kind of start with the football team, of course. Last year, 4 wins, but you're talking about your first year under Ryan Walters. Particular, I recall a 44-19 victory over Illinois, which was Illinois' worst loss of last year. But the recruiting was going real well. You were bringing in some blue chips. The people I talked to who are involved with Purdue said that Ryan Walters was doing an excellent job when it comes to garnering up NIL money, making relationships with people that matter within that program. And this year we knew things would be rough, right? Like you have a very, very tough schedule. We knew that coming into the season, but I can't imagine anyone pictured this happening. So I'll try to say this as nicely as possible. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot more polite than I've probably been the last few weeks, right? I'm just going to start from the outset coming into the season. I think there was some concern after the 2023 season, not because they went 4-8, but because they lost Nick Scorton on the edge and because they lost wide receiver Deion Burks. And it was like, okay, other teams, other programs are going to be able to come in and poach some of Purdue's top talent. But what he did was he was able to go out and get 4 players from Georgia, bring those guys in from the transfer portal, brought in some other players from the transfer portal, had like a top 20 or 25 class in the portal. And so it's funny because I always warn people when you are covering a specific program not to buy into the hype, because those coaches and those players, they're going to talk about all the positives. They're not going to talk about the negatives. But guys, I bought in. And I'm not saying I thought they were going to be a 10-win team by any stretch, but Hudson Card was actually going to be healthy. Devin Mockabee had put on 12 pounds in the offseason. They had gotten bigger and more depth on the offensive line. And so, yes, the schedule was tough, but you thought this could be maybe a good season was going to be 6-6, and you're competitive in some of those games against Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon. They got boat raced by a bad Wisconsin team. Like that's not a traditional good football, a traditional good Wisconsin football team, right? So, to make matters worse, like they've just lost 4 recruits in the last 10 days, 3 of them from the 2025 class, 2 of them are 4-star recruits. So it seems to me like, and I hate to say this because I think he's a good guy, but I think Ryan Walters is in over his head.
So where do you think it started? Like, do you think it's maybe with the hirings? Like when I look back on it, obviously, Ryan Walters, former defensive coordinator of Illinois, it was a big loss for that program. Some of you who are watching for the first time, I cover Illinois for Locked On Illinois, so that's why I'm so familiar with that program. He went with 2 assistant coach hires, which were somewhat, one made sense on the defensive side, just bringing in Kevin Kane, who he worked along with at Illinois, but the other one, Graham Harrell. I heard good things and I heard bad things, and he made it 16 games before Ryan Walters ultimately decided he needed to move on. Do you think that just wasn't a good fit? Do you think maybe Ryan should have gone with someone with a little more experience? What do you think?
Yeah. So first of all, I think when Mike Babinski, the Purdue AD, made the hire, it was going to be a hard job for whoever took over, because that team from 2022 that won the Big Ten West and played in the Big Ten championship game lost a lot of talent, especially on the offensive side. A lot of those guys graduated, and then what didn't graduate, basically they left with Jeff Brom to go to Louisville, right? So you're kind of building from the ground up. Purdue is not a place, and I think you can say this about Illinois too, like that's not a place where you kind of start your career. You can't, it's very difficult to win there. You got to try to beat out the big names. And then you've also then got to compete with the Illinois. Now Indiana's up and running, right? So I don't know if Ryan Walters was a good fit, but what he needed to do, Graham Harrell's still a young guy, right? Like I was in college at the same time Graham Harrell was, right? I think what he needed when he went out and hired assistant coaches was hire guys with experience. I think that him hiring his people, you want to hire people you feel comfortable with, but him hiring his people was a bit of an ego thing. He probably didn't want to feel like he wasn't the smartest guy in the room on his own staff. And I think that really came back to bite him. Just because nothing is working on either side of the football right now. Like we can talk about Graham Harrell and how he got fired and how the offense hasn't been clicking, but the defense has been atrocious as well. I mean, they can't even tackle right now. It's
the tackling has been horrid.
And until the Wisconsin game, they were the only team at the FBS level that had not created a turnover, and they got 2 against Wisconsin, and you saw what it didn't matter. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just been atrocious in every way, shape, and form. And like you said, there was a story from a Nebraska beat writer, or maybe it wasn't a story, maybe it was a conversation on the radio, I can't remember, but basically said he thought Ryan Walters would be terminated after his second year. And people who know and follow Purdue sports, like that's not happening. They give their coaches at least 4 years. He might have been right, because in today's era with NIL and transfer portal and having to win immediately, they're going to have to make some hard decisions. And I thought, even if Purdue goes 3-9, and not to harp on this, but since I know Justin's background a little bit, but like that 2021 Scott Frost season, if you saw that they were competitive in every game and you could see strides of this team improving, even if they didn't have the best record, I think you give Ryan Walters a third season, no question. But now they're staring 1-11 in the face, and they have not been competitive in a single football game.
Yeah. And the hardest part about this, and I think the reason for that is, of course, a lot of the things that are plaguing them, it's execution stuff. Like you were talking about, like tackling, they've had somewhat of a pass rush on occasion in some games, but the coverage has been, pretty bad, especially in the last couple of weeks. What is it about the execution that is lacking? And do you think this is purely a talent thing, or do you think, because I feel like Purdue does have talent in certain areas, or do you think this is more on the coaching right now? Because I feel like Purdue could be, even with the roster they have, a better team than they're showing so far.
To me, it's coaching, and I'm going to point to 2 examples. One of them is, and now this was relayed as a message to me, so I cannot say this as canon. I cannot say that this definitely happened. But one of the things that was relayed to me is after the game, Ryan Walters was asked about Oregon State, running the option, because especially in the second half of that game, that's where they kind of broke the game open and scored, get some big runs. And he said they didn't do anything that we planned for. Kadron Jenkins, who is maybe their defensive player and is a linebacker on that team, said that they were not expecting to see the option Oregon State run. So somewhere there's a disconnect. Yeah. Somewhere somebody's not telling the truth, right? Yep. And so that's a major problem. And then at the Nebraska Purdue game, which we were at a couple weeks ago, the pass interference, that's simply on most of those penalties. I think there were 7 pass interference. On most of them, it's just a matter of if you turn your head, you get away with it. Like it's to me, it's so simple. And again, it's tackling. Just bring guys down, and to me, it's all execution. I do think the players are there, but in some way, shape, or form, there's a disconnect. And I think, you go back to the preseason, Ryan Walters had talked about how This team was very united. They were very together. They had done a lot of things for team building. It seemed like they were all on the same page. But if there's a disconnect about knowing what Oregon State's going to do offensively, and you can't have guys that can tackle, you don't have guys who know how to turn their head when they're in coverage. Those are some big coaching errors. And like Jeff Brom in 2017, when he had the job, he took over a very bad 2016. He inherited a bad roster.
Yeah.
And that team won, like, I think they were 3-9 or 2-10 or so. I don't remember the record that far back, but he turned them into a bowl eligible team. Like, Purdue's got some dudes. This is all in my.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last part? You just cut out a little bit.
The Purdue got some because you just completely froze at that point.
Oh, sorry. I was just Purdue's got some talent. So to me, this is mostly on the coaching staff.
Yeah, because one of the big things that I noticed and kind of watching the film back from the Nebraska game is just a very high lack of eye discipline, and it's all that's coaching execution. Because what Rutgers, like looking at Rutgers and what they do, and when I was researching them going into that game, in the Washington game, Rutgers missed 14 tackles from 11 different players, but there was never anything broken because what they do a good job of is on that defensive side of the ball. They know their weaknesses and they kind of funnel the players towards help. And so I feel like there's some ways to kind of manage some of these, and I know the secondary's got, a little bit of a injury concerns. And so that's kind of, people started picking on that a little bit. The run defense was bad to begin with, but it's just like, I feel like there's a way that they can scheme this up to where it's not quite as bad as it is. And you point to a team like Rutgers, and that's a team that does it well. And that's why I think, there's still time if they could just kind of get somebody in there or get somebody who knows what they're looking at to kind of come in here and be like, okay, look, this is as simple, because fixing eye discipline is as simple as looking at film and going out and just working it. I feel like some of these things, they're very close in, and that can flip some of these losses to wins, but it's just like something's not clicking there on the staff.
Yeah. And it's been frustrating because, again, I think this team does have talent. I think that, these are still D1 football players. Those four guys that they got, they were recruited to Georgia for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so there is talent on that roster. They're just not being coached properly. And I think one of the most disheartening things is, growing up around Purdue and being around that program specifically, Purdue fans they're not okay with losing, but they're more okay if you at least show that you have some fight and some effort. Yeah. Like that Notre Dame loss is the worst loss I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of bad Purdue football. That is the worst loss I've ever seen in my life. But it's disheartening because I thought coming into this season, there was going to be I think this was going to be a fun season, whether or not that meant 4 wins, 2 wins, 6 wins. I thought it was at least going to be entertaining. You were going to see some improvement, and maybe Ryan Walters could get some momentum of this thing. But I mean, right now they are completely derailed.
It's like you were expecting flashes, but you're not getting any of that.
Yeah. And one of the concerning things I saw early in the Nebraska game, which, by the way, the score was not vindicative of that game. Nebraska moved the ball between the 20s and then for some reason ran into a brick wall when they got into the red zone, it seemed like. But they had Will Helt, who is a 6'5", 290-pound rush end out in pass coverage. Not surprising that he got burned a few times. I know you can utilize that utilize that as a weapon every now and then, but it just seems like they're depending on things that are almost trying to be too tricky, too flashy at times, and they're just not playing sound disciplined football.
Yeah.
And that's just incredible, again, just because, Ryan Walters, for the most part, got hired because of the fantastic job he did with the defense from that Illinois team, who was arguably the best defense in the country that year. He coached 3 guys in the secondary who went in the top 70 picks in the NFL draft. And now we're a year and a half later hearing about how the team itself is poorly coached and undisciplined. It's just, you never know with the world of college football. But, obviously Purdue did make a change when it comes to coaching, hiring Jason Simmons. Is there any sort of sign for optimism with him? Have things changed around? I'm grasping here, Dustin. I'm trying to, not make it a completely depressing episode. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's tough. I think so. If you go back and watch early in the Wisconsin game, I think what you can maybe say you're happy with if you're a Purdue fan is when they got into those, which I think maybe it was only one trip. These games go by so fast anymore. Takeaway, but I know in their first red zone trip, trying to score a touchdown, like I would say in other games, it kind of looks like they're just wanting to put points on the board. But in that, they ran like an option play that they hadn't run all season. So I think they're trying to do some unique things to try to at least get it in the end zone. Like I think they're at least emptying the bag at this point, because I think Jason Simmons, who was head high school football coach just 2 years ago, if that tells you anything about where the offensive staff is right now, like at least he's trying to get them points. He's not scared to try something new, because again, at this point, when you're 1-4 and you've been blown out of basically every game you've played, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the optimistic part. And I still don't know that making the offensive, like Graham Harrell wasn't doing a good job, but to me, you don't make a change on defense because Ryan Walters is the defensive specialist and it directly affects him. Going into the season, he didn't want to relinquish defensive play calling duties. So I think there's that learning curve, and that's why I say you have to have a guy like a Joe Tiller, who was at Wyoming for several years before he got hired at Purdue, a Jeff Brom, who had success at Western Kentucky before. Purdue's not a good first job. Like, go to Ball State and be successful. Go to Toledo and be successful. I know, but it is very bleak right now, and I hate talking about being so negative, because I did have a lot of optimism going into the season, but it's just when you're last in the Big Ten in penalties and you hadn't created a turnover and you're one of the worst offensive teams, one of the worst defensive teams. I think they ranked in the bottom 10% in scoring offense, total defense, and scoring defense. So like 4 big ones. They're among the worst teams in power football.
I mean, honestly, like if the coaching was a bit better, what do you think this roster win-wise is capable of, or was capable of this season if the coaching was better?
I think if the coaching was better and you put the players in better position, I still think this is a 6-win team. And I think that they would be more competitive, maybe not against Ohio State, but I think they would have been more competitive against Notre Dame, because when I went through the schedule before the season, I thought, okay, probably going to get a win. Knowing what we know now, it seems kind of silly. You're going to get a win against Indiana State, probably get one against Michigan State and Northwestern. And then you look at the other games, you think going into the season, Indiana's going to be better, but they're going to be average. You look at Illinois, they're probably going to be not a team you can't beat. Nebraska, Wisconsin, Oregon State. You thought that there were a lot of winnable games on that schedule. So if you could win those 3 that I mentioned and then get, squeak out 3 or 4, you could have a pretty good season. And I still think that's the case. Like, I think Devin Maccabee's a really good running back. Obviously, Sonny knows. Reggie Love was a really good running back at Illinois. So, like, they've got a 1-2 punch. I think Hudson Card last year had a really good season, and he was banged up for most of it. Like, they've got some dudes. They just need better coaching. And I hate to say that, because I don't think Ryan Walters is a bad coach. I just think he wasn't properly prepared for this job.
He may not have been ready.
Right.
Like Deshaun Foster over at UCLA. I don't think he's a bad
exactly.
coach. I just don't think he was ready.
Yeah. That's a great comparison.
So Saturday, obviously Purdue, Illinois, we've already referenced, and everyone has referenced, that Purdue's schedule is arguably the toughest in the country, even after this Illinois game. Just how much of a must win is this game against Illinois? Because as you said, otherwise you're looking at a possibility of having a 1 or 2 win season for the rest of the schedule.
Yeah. I don't even know that it's a must win as it is a must compete. Like, I think if you just showed us something and gave us something to hold on to, there would be some positives to say, at least you're seeing something from this team. At least you're seeing some fight. But as I mentioned, this team hasn't scored a point in the first quarter against a FBS opponent.
Yeah.
I mean, crazy. It's been so rough. So I just put the must wins aside at this point, because I don't think this team isn't going to go bowling. It's going to be hard for Ryan Walters, I think, to save his job at this point. I mean, FU were able to rattle off some wins, but the way they perform, like usually in those situations, you see something, right?
Yeah.
Like you see, like, oh, we could get them here. We could, a few plays here and there. We're a different ball club, but that's just not the case. So I think it's more of a must compete, and that's critical because if not, Ohio State and Oregon may put up historic numbers when they play Purdue.
Which in hindsight, depending on which coach you get, Georgia Southern beat Nebraska there at the end of the game to get Frost fired. It was the most sad I've ever been after a loss, but it led to this. So in a way, that may not be as disastrous as you think, because if he pulls an upset on one of those games, then he might save his job.
Sure.
And then you're in this whole thing all over again. So. But Sonny, was there any predictions for this game, considering who we got here?
I mean, Dustin, I don't know if you do predictions. I haven't released my official prediction for Locked On Illinois yet, but I'll be honest. Ryan Walters and Brett Bielema have a very cordial relationship, but I know that there's some things that Ryan has done since he was hired at Purdue, which just kind of rubbed the Illinois staff a little bit the wrong way. I think if Illinois has the opportunity to run up the score on Purdue, they're absolutely going to take it. They're not going to be complacent winning 27-7 or 10. I think if they have a chance to put up 40, they will. Honestly, I'll just say 44-10 Illinois.
That was really close. In my head, I was going to go 34-10 Illinois, but maybe we can split the difference somewhere there. But I think it's going to be Illinois in a landslide. I think 10 points is the most points Purdue scored in their against their 4 FBS opponents. So, they scored 21 against Oregon State. So
it's just a really important game for Illinois as well, because Purdue's won 7 of the last 8 games between these two programs. Illinois doesn't have a rivalry trophy in their cabinets yet. And so, truthfully, if you ask me, I think the 2 most important games when the schedule came out in the out-of-conference was probably Kansas for Illinois. And for Brett, it was probably Purdue, just because we're battling for the same guys, right? And more often than not, at least for the last year and a half, Purdue has been the one getting them. And so just because of the lopsidedness of this rivalry as of late, and, the fact that Purdue's campus is 90 minutes away, and we all heard about the Hudson Card. So basically, Justin, you may not have been familiar with this, but Hudson Card was on his official visit at Illinois when he was looking for a place to transfer to. And as soon as his official visit was done, Ryan Walters literally showed up in Champaign to drive him back to West Lafayette.
No way.
Oh, and wow.
So that, again, stuff like that, it's like there's, business is business. We get
petty.
It. Yeah, but it's a little petty. So it's one of those things where I know that 44-19 loss really hurt last year. I would not be surprised. I know the type of coach Brett Bielema is. He's got 44-19 all over that locker room. He wants to remind the players what the score was last year. And so I think if they have the opportunity, that Illinois is not going to take their foot off the pedal on Saturday.
And you mentioned also on the Illinois side, like, in addition to getting that big win, they got Michigan and Oregon coming up. You want a lot of momentum heading into the next 2 games, because those could be, is it like, this sounds crazy, but I'm not convinced Illinois is out of the college football playoff picture just yet. Like, if they beat Michigan, they set up a huge game against Oregon. I don't know that they'll beat Oregon, but which Oregon team are you going to get? The one that played Boise State and Idaho, or are you going to get the one that boat raced Oregon State and Michigan State? Like, this is
So, Dustin, you actually just piggyback on an episode I just did last week. Hypothetically, if everything goes, well, after we're done with Oregon, Illinois should be favored or close to favored in all their remaining games.
I feel like Illinois is still being like slept on. Like, I don't understand it. I don't get it.
Indiana's getting all the publicity right now. I'm a big Cornhusker fan in 2 weeks.
Like, if you watch Illinois and like break them down, what they do schematically, like, they set everything up so well on the offensive side of the ball. They disguise things, and they have, they have a package. They use 85 and 84 as an H-back a lot, and they set up a lot of things off of those, but they just kind of, it's like body blows throughout the game. And then when the second half comes, all of those plays that they set up, they start to kind of unload those. And it's just a very systematic approach where they try to wear you down. And even though they don't have a great run game, they'll still go to it to keep you. They did a good job of it with eye discipline, especially. They did a good job of getting Nebraska's defensive eyes in the wrong place and getting us out of position. And so with Purdue's eye discipline, that is going to be a nightmare. But yeah, Illinois is a team that I think is just so well coached. I don't think they out talent Nebraska, but they out game planned, out executed, out coached, and just out-willed them. And I think that's where teams are really sleeping on Illinois.
I just want to circle back on, Dustin's comment. Like, if you're right? If somehow we're able to beat Michigan, the game is in Champaign, then there's a possibility your only 2 losses are to Oregon, who at that point may just have 1 loss. Like, looking at their schedule, maybe Ohio State, and then a Penn State team that has a very easy schedule themselves. So if your only 2 losses, you're going in, at 10-2, with your only losses being to Oregon and Penn State, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but there's a path there where all of a sudden, the people who are overlooking Illinois right now are going to have no choice but, especially if Nebraska continues, getting better every single week, that victory is going to look better and better. A victory against Michigan is going to catch the attention of the country, just because I know that particular week, it's a 100-year anniversary of the Red Grange game. A lot of people are going to make a big deal out of that.
I like you on that game.
I believe it's on national television. I believe that one's on CBS. So like the whole world's going to, or a decent amount of people are going to be watching that game on TV. So it's all about game at a time, but who knows? I'm remaining cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. I mean, this is
Saturday.
It's a great position to be in, and I like Brett Bielema a lot. So I hope that they can keep this momentum going. I mean, I think they will this week without much trouble. But
speaking of playoff, though, we got the big game, Ohio State, Oregon, coming up this weekend. So on that, is there anything else you wanted to touch on for Purdue or anything, Sonny? Good?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
All right. Ohio State, Oregon. How does this play out?
So my 2 big concerns about Oregon earlier in the season were their offensive line looked atrocious in those first 2 games against Idaho and Boise State. So, but it looks like they have maybe gelled together. I think they were starting a true freshman at center. And so
they moved some pieces around, and it's working a lot better.
So, and it looks like they have a chemistry, and they've started to gel. So that looks better. My big concern in this game would be, can Oregon throw the long ball? Can they stretch the field against Ohio State? Because they are very good sideline to sideline. I think Tez Johnson is a really good playmaker, but you're going to have to stretch the field. You're going to have to open up the running game a little bit against Ohio State. And I just don't know if Dylan Gabriel is capable of that. We've seen him been able to do it at times, but they have not played a good, what's funny about this whole thing is this is going to be the best defense Oregon has faced all season. It's also going to be the best offense Ohio State has seen all season. So we're going to find out a lot about both of these teams, but I think I have more faith in Ohio State. And if Oregon can stretch the field, if they can hit the long ball every now and then I think that gives them a real shot to win. If not, I think Ohio State's got the athletes at defensive back, especially to keep those Oregon receivers in front of them. And I don't think it would be a blowout, but it could be one of those, 28-14 where you never really pull away, but you also never really feel uncomfortable if you're an Ohio State fan.
Yeah.
I can see this game going 2 ways too. Ohio State, I think if Ohio State wins, this could be, not that he needs it anymore, but the Jeremiah Smith coming out party, like literally the one game that makes him, a staple in every announcer's mouth moving forward. But I'm really interesting. For me, I want to see Will Howard play, because there's a lot of talk with Kyle McCord having gone to Syracuse, and he's played very well. There's a lot of Ohio State fans who are somewhat, second guessing whether they made the right call at that quarterback position ultimately. And so is he ready to step up and show that he can win a game for Ohio State? Because in my opinion, when you compare rosters, it doesn't matter. Both of these rosters are 4 of the best rosters, 4 or 5 of the best rosters in the entire country. Quarterback play, Dylan Gabriel, I think I would give the edge to, but is Will Howard able to win this game for them. I don't think so. I actually have, at least in my picks, I took Oregon in the 4 points. I believe that what the spread opened out as. But I just can't wait to watch this game.
Yeah. Me personally, Ohio State, in my opinion, is the best team in the country. Coming into the season, I thought Oregon would win the season game, and then Ohio State would kind of win the championship, Big Ten championship. However, things have changed, right? I just think Ohio State right now is the most complete team in the country. They're well coached. They don't have a lot of flaws that show out. And again, what they did to Iowa, like, I know that's Iowa, but that's hard to do to Iowa. Like, just to systematically beat them down and win as bad as they did in the second half, when that's an Iowa team that likes to wear down and beat teams in the second half. They're very disciplined and stuff like that. Oregon has fixed and corrected a lot of their offensive line issues. Their secondary has played better. They've gotten better in a lot of ways. I just think this Ohio State team is built to win this year. And not that Oregon isn't. I just think they ran into a buzzsaw of an Ohio State team this year that is just, they got talent across the board. And I don't even think they've had to use it all as much as they even can. And so I picked 38-28 was the score that I predicted for this one, with Ohio State winning. These score predictions?
I'll say 34-31 Oregon.
I'm going to go, I'll say 35-31 Ohio State.
Yeah, you're closer than me. Yeah. It'll be a good game regardless.
Yeah. There's one thing, I'm going to do a shameless plug here, but one thing I wrote about today is that in these kind of cross-country games with the 4 new Big Ten schools, the road team is 1-8 in these games. Now, some of that's a little bit misleading because, UCLA and Penn State, like Penn State was obviously favored in those games, but Michigan going to Washington losing, USC going to Michigan and losing, USC going to Minnesota and losing. So there's been Indiana at UCLA was the only big win. So that's another factor in this game. I don't think it's going to matter as much for a team as talented as Ohio State, but it could be a factor.
Yeah, very well could be. And too, like, I'll drop a link to that in the description. So any of your stuff that you want to plug to, go ahead and do that. Sonny, was there anything that you wanted to do before we conclude the show?
No, not really. Just make sure if you're watching this for the first time, Justin and I, we're back to our routine of releasing 1 episode, if not 2 episodes a week. A couple times a month, we're going to be doing watch parties for the biggest games of the week that particular season. If you're an Illinois fan individually, follow me at Locked On Illini or Illini Cast. I run both of those shows. But otherwise, just while you're here, it costs you guys nothing. Hit a like button and hit that subscribe button.
Much appreciated. And Dustin, one more time, do you want to tell people where they can find you, and what was the article that you were referencing that you just wrote?
Yeah, so it's in my Big Ten Daily, which I do pretty much every day, Monday through Friday. Sometimes there's not enough, so sometimes I skip a day here and there. Don't penalize me for that. But you can find me at Schutte Dustin on Twitter, or you can find me and my work at si.com/college/Purdue.
And for clarification, is you pronounce your last name Schutte or Schutte?
Yes, Schutte.
Okay,
you
apologize.
You've been called much worse.
I hate mispronouncing people's names. Like, I find it disrespectful, so I apologize for disrespecting the top of mispronouncing at the top of the show. But yeah, so y'all make sure to go find Dustin's stuff. Again, links will be in the description, but make sure you go give him a follow and follow along with everything that he's got going on. I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to speak with us, man. And again, your patience with us, as we have been trying to record with you for a while, but it was on us. So I appreciate you stopping by and taking the time to record with us and talk a little bit of Purdue and Ohio State and Oregon. So
yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
We'll do this again.
And that being said, we will see y'all in the next video. Peace.